How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Perfect Recall, where we dive deep into the video game news you've already read about. And that's what I would typically be saying, because this week, instead of talking about the news, I'm going to dive into a singular topic, because to be perfectly honest, this week's news was kind of only dominated by two things. The continuing story about Activision Blizzard's lawsuit and fallout from the toxic work culture. If you want an update on that, Jason Schreier of Bloomberg has an updated story on that. And then the outing of the toxic culture at Fullbright by Steve Gaynor. They're the company that made Gone Home and Tacoma, two games that I really loved. They have an upcoming game called Open Roads, and Nicole Carpenter at Polygon has a tremendous article outlining everything that has gone on there. Truly awful stuff. Yet another situation where people find themselves in a place of employment that they feel harassed, suppressed, oppressed. You know, it's not great. And for them being an indie studio, you know, they don't have any like formal HR structure that they mention, and that makes things even that much worse, even though we all know that HR is to protect the company, not to protect you, but still having some type of way to report things seems like it just didn't happen there. So those are kind of the two big stories. The last thing that happened was today, late in the afternoon, it came out that a bunch of tech websites, video game websites, got hands-on with this Valve Steam Deck. I was wrapping up my workday when that happened, and then I had to leave the house immediately afterwards, and I just didn't have time to check it out. And honest, there's not much I can really tell you anyways. I don't have one, you know, so it's not like I can give you my hands-on impressions. So definitely check out. I'm sure, you know, I know Giant Bomb got one, Linus Tech Tips got one. I'm sure like IGN and some more, you know, the video game websites you assume got one, I'm sure got one. So I'll be checking that out this weekend because I really want to see how that thing is. So what exactly are we going to discuss? And obviously you saw the title of the video. The other night, I believe it was 2 nights ago, I finished the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So it was kind of the remastered Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 that just came out a couple months ago at this point, I think. And it's the first time I've played Mass Effect 1 since it was a new release. I've played Mass Effect 2 several times over the years. It is one of my all-time favorite games. And Mass Effect 3 I have not played since the week it came out. I finished the game in about 3 days. And we're going to, you know, that's kind of the meat on the bones of tonight's discussion. So Mass Effect 1 came out at a time I was, I was finished with high school when it came out. But I had just gotten into a tragic accident, which we don't really need to get into. And so video games were not really at the, you know, top of my priorities at the time. I didn't play the game until the following year. I believe I rented it at the time, and I didn't finish it. I liked it, but it just wasn't kind of gripping me. But also at the same time, I don't think I gave it a fair shake because I just had way more important things going on in my life at the time than to worry about a video game. But when Mass Effect 2 came out, I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. And so I played it on the 360, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great, you know, had nothing really negative to say about it. When they released it on the PlayStation 3, because remember the original Mass Effect was an Xbox exclusive, and for some length of time it was assumed that the series would be an Xbox exclusive, but a little while after the fact of Mass Effect 2 releasing on the 360, it came out on the PS3, and I decided to jump back in and play it again. That's where it really clicked with me. Like, that's where I was like, you know what, this isn't just like a good game, this is a great game. And then after playing it again and thinking about it over the years, it kind of slowly crept up to like, okay, this isn't just a game that I think that's great. I think that this is like one of the defining games of my life. Like, I really dove into all the lore with the characters. I read some of the books, and I never read like video game adaptations and all that stuff. Like, I never got into like the Star Wars extended universe or anything, as much as I love the Star Wars movies. But there was just something about Mass Effect that really drew me in. And as time went on and the anticipation for Mass Effect 3 was coming, I was in. There's been a handful of games in my lifetime where I have anticipated them so strongly that it was like, I would dream about them. Like, I couldn't wait for them to come out. Grand Theft Auto 4 is one of them. Grand Theft Auto 5 is one of them. LA Noire was one. And to be honest, to some degree, Cyberpunk 2077 was one of them. But Mass Effect 3, like, I mean, like, my emotional stability was, like, on the line when this thing was coming out. And I remember picking it up, I brought it home, and I put it in, and I just started playing it. And I think I had, like, the next couple days off from work, or maybe I had taken the next couple of days off from work. I honestly can't remember. It's been almost 10 years now. But I just played the game, like, nonstop. You know, like, that's all I did. Like, I slept, you know, got some food, I'd go back, continue playing the game. And I can't tell you at the time if I had done all the side missions in the game. I'm typically someone that tries to do as many side missions as possible, so I have to assume I did, let's say, at least 75% of them. Now, obviously, none of the DLC was out at this time. Like, Leviathan wasn't out, the Citadel DLC wasn't out, the Omega DLC I don't think was out. I'm not sure if one of those launched with the games other than the From Ashes DLC, which I did. And so I'm just in this, like, almost like a race against myself to, like, get to the end. Like, it's just all been building, and I just want to plow through this game as efficiently as possible, not just, like, you know, critical path it or anything. Like, I want to do everything that it has. I want to read all the data pads and all the lore entries and all that stuff. Especially having the connection with the previous games, like carrying over a save and seeing those characters again. And that's kind of like the two things that start bringing it down for me. Throughout the game, you know, you interact with characters from previous games, some of which, you know, get to be in your party and they're a major part of the game, and some of which aren't. Some for story reasons, some for who knows why they weren't. And that's where, like, some of the disappointment started to come in. I think that there became a big issue at the time where, you know, you've probably played the game, you know, you can romance characters, and you hope that, like, okay, I put all this time and effort into choosing this person, and I want to see this outcome, and then for them to be a throwaway character in the third game, it just was like, well, what's my major resolution for all of this? Like, unless you pick someone who's a party member, that romance just kind of, like, doesn't matter. So I was like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. But, you know, it's, you know, sometimes things in games are disappointing. Oh, well. And there'd be, like, a few interactions here and there with characters from the previous games where I'm like, man, I wish they would have gotten a little bit more screen time. You know, like, Jacob's just standing around in a hospital. Like, sure, you do get a mission with him, and you get to learn a little bit about his life. You know, he's getting married, he's having a family and all that stuff, and that's very nice, but, you know, the rest of the game, you know, he's just standing in front of a check-in counter at a hospital until you get to, like, the end game, and then you can, like, communicate with him on a video chat for about 45 seconds. It's like, well, that's kind of a letdown, right? And, like, Thane, I get it. Obviously, there's gonna be spoilers. This game's been out. That's your fault if you haven't played it. You know, like, they established that Thane in the second game has a terminal medical condition and he will be dying. So in the third game, he is dying. And that's his reason for why he can't come along. Okay, that makes sense. You have a little bit of a nice interaction with him. You get a little bit more through the DLC, but it's, they did him dirty in that game. You don't get enough Thane in that game. Okay, whatever. I felt at the time that the ending of Mass Effect 3 was the single most disappointed I had ever been with a video game experience. And honestly, I think it's probably the single most disappointing thing that I've ever experienced with media. I don't know if there's a television show that's disappointed me as much with, like, you know, weird changes. Dexter's damn close because, man, that show rolled off a hill. But even, like, a band coming out with an album, even if it wasn't great, it wasn't that bad. But Mass Effect 3, like, I felt like they reached through the television and just, like, punched me in the gut. I was so upset. I felt that they had taken choice away. I had been playing purely Paragon, but it wasn't good enough because you needed to play the online mode to build up this, you know, arbitrary meter, which has been taken away in the Legendary Edition because there is no online component. And that's not to say that Mass Effect 3 shouldn't have had an online component. That was the way games were made back then. You had to shoehorn in online. And for what I've heard, I never touched it, but I've heard that the online for Mass Effect 3 was great. People really enjoyed it. That's fine. That's good. It should not have affected the single-player portion of the game. I just remember at the time feeling like they didn't like stick the landing, but it didn't feel like they didn't stick the landing because they didn't know how. And maybe that's some of it. You have this huge project that you're in charge of that makes millions of dollars, that has all this anticipation and expectations from fans, and it can be very difficult to finish. If you've ever written anything or made a song or done anything creative, you know that the ending is the absolute hardest part. And even if you've never done like a creative output, I'm sure you had to write a paper for school. And summarizing everything and tying it all together at the end with a nice, bow and ribbon on it, that's the hardest part, right? So I get that. But it just felt like they just lost it. Like, it just felt like the game was unraveling and you were like watching it unravel in front of you. Like, almost like you were watching an unfinished game, like this polished, unfinished game that costs you $60, that's released by a major developer and one of the largest publishers in the world, and it's just unfinished. So much to the point that they made an addendum DLC quite literally called the Extended Cut. Now, at the time, I didn't play it. I finished that game. I was so upset. I was so pissed. I never wanted to touch it again, and I never did up until now. So, my thoughts have changed on Mass Effect 3. I never thought that they would. I always thought it would be my biggest, disappointment in gaming. I don't know if I would say regret, because I didn't make it, but it was just always this, sticking point in my life with video games. But having just finished it, doing all the DLC, I have a couple of things to say. One, they did not change, and I don't think they could have, because they would have had to get voice actors back and reanimate things and do a bunch of stuff. Obviously, the interactions with non-playable former party members has not changed. You don't get enough with them. The Citadel DLC, which I'm going to touch upon in a second, does help with some of that, but not every character in the game goes there, because there are some that die regardless of your actions in the game. So that can't change. But the ending, I looked up exactly what was different in the extended version versus the original. To be honest, it's not a whole lot. There's some exposition, and, the Star Child is explaining things in a little bit more detail, and you get a better grip on things. But I no longer felt like the game was unraveling. I no longer felt like I was playing an unfinished product. It no longer seemed like they had lost control of this thing that had grown bigger than they are. It just feels rushed now. And that's not the worst thing in the world. Is it a perfect ending? Absolutely not. Out of all of the endings that you can possibly get, I don't think that you could really truly be satisfied with any one of them. But it no longer feels like you're playing a subpar product. To the point where I will say my time on Mass Effect 3, hugely positive. I liked it almost as much as Mass Effect 2. I think it's an incredible game. Obviously, I've matured in that time. I've played a wider variety of games in that time. There's more life experience in that time. You come back to an old thing with fresh eyes. You have a different take on things, a different perspective. I think having the DLC helped, and this is, I'm going to talk about the Citadel DLC. That is, it's pure fan service, which is sometimes exactly what you need with something like this. Anytime you have a property, and this really seems to happen with fantasy and sci-fi stuff. Think about the fervent fandoms behind Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars. I feel like there's definitely a pocket of that for Mass Effect. Sometimes fan service isn't the worst thing in the world. Getting all those Easter eggs and references to the previous games and minor characters was fantastic. The Citadel DLC, being able to interact, technically one last time with your crew and posing for a group photo, and just the funny things that happen throughout it. The interactions that happen with characters that wouldn't have normally been able to interact with each other because they appeared as playable characters in different games. It's truly one of the best pieces of DLC I've ever played, bar none. I absolutely loved it. The Leviathan DLC, I know that that's a must-play. Yes, if you're playing Mass Effect 3, you have to play the Leviathan DLC. It gives you so much backstory and lore. That one, I can take it or leave it. It is what it is. The whole Reaper thing and, the plot of the game, Mass Effect kind of doesn't make sense to begin with, and no matter what they do to make it make sense, it just still doesn't kind of work on me, I guess. But but I'm glad it was there. And I'm glad that I played it, and I'm glad that I enjoyed it. So it's just one of those things to kind of think about. And I think it's something that we should do as people that play video games. Find a game you didn't like from your past, not just that you didn't like, but not because the gameplay was bad, because the gameplay's not going to get better. You know, it's not all of a sudden the gameplay's going to get better as you get older. I would think of a game in your life that maybe you just feel like fell short of what it should have been. Go back and play it. See what you think of it now. Maybe it's still terrible. Maybe you still don't like it. But maybe you'll do a complete and total 180 like I did. I will no longer badmouth Mass Effect 3. I will no longer look back on Mass Effect 3 as a negative thing in my life. I will no longer feel like they tripped and stumbled and fumbled the ball, you know, at the goal line with Mass Effect. The endings still aren't great. But few things in life wrap up nicely. You don't always get what you want, and that's just part of life. But I think to say that Mass Effect 3 is a bad game is a wholly inaccurate statement. I think it's a good game. I think it's a great game, to be honest. It plays great. It's a fantastic shooter. If you're a fan of the series, you know, what better way to like experience that with like all the camaraderie that it kind of forces it down your throat, but in a way that's not too bad. You know, there's a lot of conversations throughout the game like, oh, this is our last time together. You know, when this is all over with, you and I will go do this, or you and I will go do that. You really get that impending sense of like, this is it, no more after this. It's a good game. It really is. And if you take anything away from anything I ever say, give some games a second chance. We'll leave it at that. And that's going to wrap it up for this week. As always, I want to thank you for joining me, and let's get into a little channel housekeeping. Not too much going on. New episode of Finally Getting Around to It dropped this week. I played Harry Potter Quidditch World Cup on the Nintendo GameCube. That game is terrible, but I think the video came out all right. That series is doing well. I have fun doing it. And I'm excited to have something else besides this show that comes out on the channel on a regular basis. Still plugging away at the next big video, making some big changes behind the scene in terms of production. So I'm excited to do some new things, try out some new stuff, and yeah, it's gonna be cool. But thanks again for watching, and we'll be right back here next Saturday for another episode of Perfect Recall.